Welcome to the Lunchtime Discovery Series. It is good to be with you again for another edition of our program brought to you by the North Carolina Office of Environmental Education within the Department of Environmental Quality and us over here at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, gathering around the glow of our YouTube channel every Wednesday at noon to meet some interesting people who are doing interesting things out there in the world. And today we have, of course, a fantastic show for you. Very excited for today's program. I'll remind everybody that as we go through the program today, the Lunchtime Discovery Series is interactive. That's right. This only works if y'all are, one, tuned in and watching, and then two, dropping comments and questions in the chat as we go along. Of course, we've got a guest speaker. They're going to come on and give what I'm certain is going to be a fantastic presentation. But then we need to ask them questions. And you have to do that. You have to put your questions in the chat, and then I will facilitate and moderate and share those with our guest speaker, and we can have a fabulous conversation once we get towards the end of the presentation and round out today's program. So that's what makes this thing work. I'm here, the guest speaker is here, but also you're here, and that's what makes Lunchtime Discovery Series run. Now, for today's guest, I'm very excited because as a state employee, I'm not allowed to endorse things, but I think I can say factually that I subscribe to the North Carolina Rabbit Hole. I get the emails, and the author of that newsletter, also the producer of the podcast Away Message, and a longtime journalist, producer, and writer here in North Carolina, is with us today, Jeremy Markovich. Hi, Jeremy.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Glad you could be with us today. I'm excited.
Yeah, and I'm really thrilled to be here and just to talk all things North Carolina. I am a wealth of largely useless knowledge, but some of it is actually relevant, and it'll kind of it's interesting depending on who you're talking to. So I am excited to kind of share some of that today. So
I'm excited to hear. You certainly have a knack for like finding interesting and fun and entertaining, but also just like brain twisting kinds of stories that go in so many different directions, but wind up being, I don't know, is wholesome the right word?
Yeah, wholesome. I think
fulfilling.
Yeah, I mean, there is nothing better to me than like solving some kind of mystery, even if that is the lowest consequential mystery that you could possibly solve. Like, basically, I had carved out a niche for myself that, like, if somebody sees something weird on the internet and they're like, it's kind of North Carolina related, why don't you outsource this to me and I will figure it out? And like, I mean, somebody the other day was, but it's not the other day. It's been a bit, but they like were on, I think, eBay or on some kind of sales website, and it was like, why is somebody selling a gigantic foam sphinx like in the Greater Hickory area? And it turns out somebody had made this giant intricately detailed sphinx out of foam for like a religious convention, and they had it, and they're like, well, we don't need this anymore, convention's over. And they were trying to unload it on like Facebook Marketplace. And so I was like, I got the story behind it. And like half the time, honestly, it just takes a phone call or two to figure it out. Sometimes it takes months and months and months, and it's one of the stories I'll tell today.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Turn it over to you.
All right. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things, I want to talk about today, and again, I'm so thrilled to be here, and I'm glad that y'all have me, and that you're here to hang out here over your lunch break. One of the things that I think about all the time as I'm traveling across North Carolina, I've been here for, again, not a native North Carolinian. I've been around North Carolina since 2005. I lived in Charlotte, so actually I moved to outside of Greensboro in 2015. So that's really when I moved to North Carolina. Again, Charlotte's its own. I love Charlotte; it's a great place. It's its own thing. But when I was lucky enough to start working for our state, I got to travel all around the state, and one of the things that I really, really enjoyed is that I felt kind of like an explorer. You go out, you go to different places, you see a lot of different things, you talk to a lot of different people. The great thing about it is you to places that are small that you would not normally go to. You go to places that a lot of people go to. You get to kind of compare and contrast, but you get to, I was lucky enough to, it was my job to go to places and talk to people. And it kind of got me into exploration. The podcast that I do, I'm kind of starting to bring it back, but I had done it for four years when I was at our state. It was called Away Message, and it originally was about North Carolina's most remote places. And it just like, because I was very curious, like what are people doing in places that are hard to get to? Why are they so hard to get to? What made them the way they are? Why don't more people live, let's just say, on like Knott's Island and like all these interesting places across the state? And so, but they really at their core are about exploration. And I think kind of what I want to talk about today is, what is the difference between being an explorer way back when, hundreds of years ago, versus what it means to be an explorer in 2023. If you go way back in the day, this is kind of sort of basic North Carolina history 101, but back in the day, people got around by sailing ship. All of the big cities in North Carolina were on the coast. Like New Bern was the capital. Wilmington was a very large city, was the largest city for a long time. Like Bath, tiny little Bath was once a very, very significant place. Even though it's still there, like it's a great little town, but like it had not grown to a major metropolis. But it used to be very important. And so it was just hard to get inland. And over time that changed, but the railroads came, and then the highways, and then you were able to go up, streams and rivers. And things have really, really kind of changed. So the idea of what it means to be an explorer is way, way different than it used to be. But there are still sort of things around that are the way that they are today because of it used to be much harder to get around way back in the day when they actually made things or decided things or that sort of thing. So one of the things that I think about is the thing that we think about a lot when we think about North Carolina, which is like, if you want to tell people like you have some kind of North Carolina pride, like you're really proud of where you live, you may get like a sticker with like the outline of the state on it, right? And you're just like, oh yeah, you see that instantly, it's like North Carolina. But the borders that were drawn in North Carolina that made this state, they didn't just happen. It wasn't like just someday just somebody goes, you know what, we're just going to make this line, and that's the colony that will become a state. They are the way they are because people had a hard time getting around. The northern line between Virginia and North Carolina was drawn by a guy. The guy who was in charge was William Byrd, who, by the way, hated North Carolinians. Like, he just thought, like, you eat too much barbecue, it fills you with, quote, gross humors. Not a fan of North Carolinians, William Byrd. But he was in charge of drawing the border. And, the line was supposed to be a straight line. That's it. Straight line. You start here, there's a mandate from somebody that says you start here, you go due west. Well, the problem is, like, he got to the Great Dismal Swamp, which is today not as great, not as dismal, and actually not a swamp. It's a great state park, and you should totally visit there. But if you were expecting like the world's swampiest swamp, you were not going to get that. George Washington drained it actually a long time ago. But back in the day when William Byrd was going through, he's like, this is not a place that I want to be. I am going to send my minions through the swamp, and I will meet you on the other side. Because surveying a line across the state was a really, really hard thing to do, and you had to go straight across, even if there's a swamp in your way. You also have stuff like in the line between North Carolina and South Carolina. It's supposed to come up from the coast, I think around the mouth of the Cape Fear River, maybe 30 miles to the west of there, goes up at a 45-degree angle, and is supposed to then hit a specific, latitude and go across. And it did, but they missed. They didn't get. They ended up not going high enough, north enough, and so they shorted South Carolina by like hundreds of thousands of acres, again, because surveying is hard. The terrain is tough. It's hard to get around. They made a mistake. And so then when they got to around Charlotte, and if you notice, the border around Charlotte kind of goes up and around and follows what used to be the Catawba reservation land. That's why it kind of comes to a point, follows the Catawba River, and then starts heading west again. Well, it was supposed to just go straight across. But they were like, well, we messed up before. Let's just kind of draw it to the north to give South Carolina some land back that they kind of should have had in the first place. They do that. But if you notice, that line does not due west. It goes up a little bit because there were iron deposits in the area and their compasses were thrown off. And so it's a little bit off. There are like scars of, a long time ago for an episode of Boy Message, I talked to a professor at Duke, and he was like, borders bear the scars of history. And you definitely get that when you're looking around North Carolina. But these guys were surveyors. They were out. They were explorers. They had to explore this new land and go to places that people don't normally go. And even though it's supposed to be a very technical exercise, it's a very human exercise. One of the stories about that is if you go out to the far western reaches of North Carolina, along the border with Tennessee, which, by the way, I want to just take a moment. There is a reader of the North Carolina Rabbit Hole, Henry Gargan. He is an attorney up in the mountains now. He is a Long Carolina truther. And what he means by that is, North Carolina, it just used to keep going, right? Like there was no Tennessee. It existed before Tennessee. It technically went to the Mississippi River and onward. But back in the day, again, very hard to govern a very big state when it's hard to get around. So they were just like, we don't need this Tennessee area. We'll just give it back to the federal government, and they made Tennessee out of it. But Henry is very much like, there is no Tennessee. There is only Long Carolina. So I just want to shout out Henry for believing in Long Carolina even when nobody else does. But when they had to draw the border between North Carolina and Tennessee, they sent people out and they said, hey, start here, follow a ridge line, and keep on following the ridge line until you get to Georgia. If you look at Western North Carolina, again, that is not the case. Really hard stuff to get around. It's hard to get around. It is just, again, you're going over mountains, through trees. Like, it's hot. It's not a fun job. There are bugs. It stinks. It's not a romantic thing. At some point, and there is no actual that I've been able to find documentation of why this happened. But at some point, they were just following the ridge line, and they just like, you know what, we're done here. And they just go draw a line due south, and that's it. And it just goes to Georgia. So if they had done the job they were supposed to do, a little town called Ducktown, Tennessee, would actually be part of North Carolina. So it wouldn't be Murphy to Manteo, it would be Ducktown to Manteo. They just gave up. The apocryphal story that nobody can really prove, or I don't know, there's no documentation, it's just rumored to be, is that they ran out of whiskey. And they ran out of whiskey, and they're like, we're getting out of here. Just make the line straight. And they gave up. And it's amazing to me that we are the way that we are. The thing that binds us is just basically the lines that constrain North Carolina. Like, if you want to say what a North Carolinian is, can be a million different things. But in some way, it means that you live inside of these lines that were created by these original explorers who had a really hard time getting around. And had they had an easier time, or they had more precise instruments or whatever, we might be talking about different areas or talking about different people who are in part of our state or not. You mess up some, completely. Charlotte could be in South Carolina if they just kept on going too far, right? So you could make this argument that early explorers defined who we are. Now today, what it means to be explorer is way, way different. Because I grew up in an era that I was a map nerd. I love looking at maps. I love just kind of that's how I was able to imagine the world around me that I just couldn't get to. Grew up in a small town in Northeast Ohio. My parents, as gifts, bought me road atlases for my county and then the surrounding counties. This is like long before I could drive. I think they just wanted to have the actual navigator in the car before GPS was around. They're just like, we're gonna holler at like 9-year-old Jeremy in the back seat, and he's gonna tell us how to get like across the county in some obscure place. So was always into maps, because maps kind of present exotic locales that you can get to and learn about without actually being there, and your imagination just kind of fills in the rest. So the insets of like back in the day when you have like, Raleigh or Greensboro, and then it's like you see where all the roads go, and these are all the major streets, and this is where the downtown is, and this is how you get there, and here's a little square with a little flag on top, and that's something important. those are like the ways that you kind of get around the state. That's how you understand the world around you. But you don't have any concept of like what this place is actually like until you go there. So going there, just being in a place that you've never seen before, is an exciting experience. And I still think that is true today. We went to, my wife and I went to Quebec last summer, and went to Quebec City and Montreal. Had never been there, had always wanted to go. And it was an amazing place just to be in. The weather, the locale, the environment, the people, the food, like it was just an amazing, amazing trip. The major difference is back in the day when I was a kid and I just had to close my eyes and imagine what an exotic place like, I don't know, Greensboro might be like. I would kind of have to close my eyes and think of like what the city was like, or maybe I might find a picture or two in a book. You can now go anywhere on Google Street View. There is not too much of the globe that hasn't been mapped by Google Earth or by satellite picture. So you don't really get as much discovery. Like I had already taken a virtual tour of Quebec City and the cobblestone streets long before I'd gone there. I already knew what it was going to look like. I didn't know what it was going to feel like or what the experience would be like, which, by the way, just randomly saw the Pope in Quebec City. He was there when we were. He booked his trip after ours, so I think he was coming to see us rather than the other way around. But like, that's an experience you can't have by just going virtually. But like, what it looks like. You kind of know what the environment's like, and you can go down any street that you want almost to see what it's like. And the internet has kind of given rise to interesting communities built around things and bringing people together that maybe didn't know that they had something in common, or were wondering the same thing, but like, I wonder if anybody else is thinking about this. In general, the answer is yes. The thing that you were thinking about, other people have probably thought about it. In fact, they've probably thought about doing it. They've probably thought about maybe taking a trip, or they would like to talk to somebody else about this. And creating community for all of the ills of the internet, creating interesting communities and giving people a sense of purpose around even the smallest and nerdiest of pursuits is really an amazing thing. And one of the things that I think about is the example is, again, this is a border story because I just love the borders, but this is really a people story. Long ago, one of the first episodes that I did Way Message, and it ended up being a story for our state, was I went to the westernmost point in North Carolina. Now, the easternmost point is in Rodanthe. That is where it is. It is the point, of the Outer Banks that juts out just a little bit further than anywhere else. It's a problem. It's a place where they're having a problem currently with houses that are collapsing into the ocean because the island wants to move, but the houses don't. And I've written about that, the rabbit hole. It's an interesting thing. But like, Rodanthe is a place that you would go to regardless if it was the easternmost point or not, right? Like, it's part of the Outer Banks. It's a gorgeous place. Richard Gere had a movie that, like, oh, wow, look at this place. We should go to Nights in Rodanthe. That would be an interesting, it looks pretty on film. It must be an interesting place in real life. And it actually is. The westernmost point is very different because the westernmost point is out there and you don't end up there on accident. I just mentioned, this whole idea of North Carolina as a really long state, not as long as Long Carolina would be, but it's 500 plus miles long from Murphy to Mania. What people don't actually realize is that when you get to Murphy, there is a half hour of state past Murphy before you get to Tennessee. It keeps going. And when you get out there, by the way, love Murphy, been there 4 times for some inexplicable reason, but it is like it is my spirit animal for a city in the state. So if you're watching from Murphy, hello, I will come see you again someday. I swear to you. But when you get to Murphy and you keep on going, you find sort of like the last road before you hit Tennessee. You turn down that road, you weave in and out, and you're right there at the point where Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina meet. And to get out there, you drive down this road, and then you come up on this little wood house that is out there. It's nestled kind of in the mountains in a little bit of a valley. It's a beautiful area. Across the street, there's a pasture with cows on it. The hills are great. When I visited, the sky was blue with a couple puffy clouds. And I met this couple named Adie and Shirley Patterson. And Adie and Shirley Patterson were like the nicest people. I had called ahead. I had some people in Murphy drive out there on my behalf to like say, is it cool if this guy comes out and talks to you about the westernmost point in North Carolina? And they're like, sure. gave me a glass of water. I sat on their couch, and they just told me, like, yeah, I built this house by myself in the 1950s. People say, like, oh yeah, my grandfather built this house. Like, a lot of times maybe, but like maybe your grandfather paid somebody to build the house. Like, you didn't actually build the house. Like, 80 built the house. And he'd just always been a farmer out there. And he'd always known that part of his land was in Georgia and part of his land was in North Carolina. He was aware of it, like, when it comes time to pay your taxes, but it's not like a big factor of life. You just have the land that you have in the area that you have it. And that was just it. Well, he started noticing maybe 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, that more and more people were coming to his land to see what he called the corner. And the corner is the spot in North Carolina where North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia meet. The actual place, and I think I'm going to be able to share a picture of it. The actual place is like way out, is basically out. I'm going to bring this up for y'all here. Let's see if I can get this here. That is not it, but I am going to be right there. Okay, this is it. So if you can see on the screen here, what you're seeing is really close to it. This rock that is right here was painted by A.D. Patterson himself. He took a lot of pride in this particular piece of land that he had. And the actual corner is this little brass disc that's in the ground next to a fence. And over time, more people started coming to this place. And he's like, what is going on? Like, why? Who wants to see it? By the way, I think I have a picture of 80 here. That's him. Just the nicest guy. He was a farmer. I recently found out just a couple of weeks ago that he had passed away 2 years ago. Was really, really sorry to hear that. But just this old school guy that was out there. He said stuff like, he was trying to think of something one time, and he used the words, golly bum. And he was like, okay, what was this guy's name? Golly bum. I wish I remember the guy's name. Like, he was just like sort of in awe of all of these people that showed up on his property. His wife, not so much. I think his wife saw more of his nuisance, but he was just happy to be this unofficial tour guide. And what had happened was nothing that AD did. It was just the fact that A.D. Patterson himself, the internet came along, and the internet gave rise to people who were interested in the places where 3 or more states touch. There was a small community that popped up around this idea, and it drew in people from all over the country. AD told me that back in the, like, basically he was getting Christmas cards from a guy from California, a guy from Pasadena, California, who had come to visit him and see the corner, to see this spot. And he's like, and I'm like, why would anybody from Pasadena, California come to this place specifically to see that? It seems like a long trip to see what is realistically just a brass disc in the ground. And he's like, no, I remembered his name. His name is Todd Barber. Todd Barber, he's like, he works for NASA. To do a direct quote, he works for that NASA company, is what AD told me. And I tried to get in touch with Todd for a while, wouldn't get back to me for like the longest time. And I'm like, man, like, why doesn't, and this happens in journalism. You ask people to talk to you, they don't talk to you, and you're like, come on, man. Like, you just can't crack the case. Well, finally got back to me. And Todd, it turns out, is not just like some guy. He was the lead propulsion engineer on the Cassini spacecraft. So he was the guy in charge of like the thrusters that shot that spacecraft at Saturn. Like, he was in charge of making sure it didn't miss and like shoot off into like the vast void of space, like, and then like kept it in orbit for years while it did all the scientific stuff, took the pictures, did all the things that we know about Saturn. Like, that's Todd's rocket that got it there. And the reason why he couldn't talk to me is because he was actually, the mission was ending, and to end the mission, so it didn't accidentally like contaminate a moon around Saturn, they crashed it into Saturn. So Todd told me when I finally got in touch with him, hey man, I'm like really sorry I didn't talk to you earlier. I was busy crashing a spacecraft into Saturn. So that's a good excuse. That's a good reason for not getting back to me sooner. So, but Todd went all the way out there because people love to talk to Todd about NASA stuff. his real pursuit, his real mission, that was like his hobby, was trying to go to all the places in the country where 3 or more states touch. This is a pursuit that is in some places easy. Like if you think of the Four Corners out west, you can kind of drive to it. It's really easy to get to. Other places, like he said, like I had to like hire a guide, and we went on a 20-mile ride across the desert on horseback to get to a place where a couple of states met. And there was just like a pipe sticking out of the ground. And I was so happy to see it. He was part of this community of tri-pointers that was interested in finding this place. That place exists. There are guides to it online about how to get to them all. There are discussion groups about how to get to them all. There are people you can go online and brag and get some street cred online by going to all of these places. And Todd finally did it. And Todd's like one of the few places people that have done it. It's, again, a thing that you may have done before the internet, but the internet gives you the resources in the community to be able to explore things that people would not normally explore or feel weird about exploring, maybe. And the thing that he discovered when he got there was not so much like, oh, this is an interesting place. He met AD and Shirley, and they were really, really nice people. And they took him in, and they did the same thing for him as they did for me. They gave him some water. They talked to him for a little while. He got to know them. And he met people that then ended up on his Christmas card list, that he found in a place that most of us would not go. And so, can I reshare the picture of AD? Yes, I will share. Let me see if I can do that. Yeah, he was the nicest person. And by the way, this is your trivia fact. I'm going to give you a couple trivia facts. This is one of them. That is AD Patterson. I think you can see him there. Sitting on his tractor years ago, the late AD Patterson. The westernmost piece of property in North Carolina is owned by him, who is a Georgian. So the westernmost piece of property in North Carolina is actually owned by a bunch of Georgians. So that is AD right there. That is the man who is a very, very nice man who I was lucky enough to meet him and his wife. Just lovely people. The interesting thing about remote places is, yeah, they're remote, but like there are people there. And when you try to explore these places, you end up meeting people who have interesting stories to tell. And I think the thing about actually going to remote places is I probably could have found my way to the westernmost point on my own. I would have gone there, maybe bought some maps, talked to some people, whatever. It is so much easier to actually go off the beaten path, like literally off the beaten path than it used to be because of all the technology we have now. So exploring in a way, there's a lower barrier to entry to getting to be an explorer. And that kind of takes me to when I went to the most remote spot in North Carolina. Back in the day, it would have been a really, really hard thing to figure out, right? Like, what does remote even mean? How do I figure this out? The way that I figured it out was I went to Google and I typed in, what is the most remote spot in North Carolina? And it gave me a result. And the result was Ryan and Rebecca Means, biologists who live in Florida, had started this thing called Project Remote. Project Remote was this idea that, a lot of remote places across the country and across the world are vanishing due to development and deforestation and all of these other things that are affecting kind of our modern world. What does it mean to be remote in the modern era? And how do you define it? And so the way that they defined it was they looked at every single state, they got a mapping program out, and they ran the numbers, and they figured out where the furthest point away from a road was in every single state. And they said, that is the most remote spot in every single state. It's an arbitrary definition. You may not like it. You may think it's wrong, but that's kind of what they went with. It sounded good to me. And I'm like, okay, I think I'm down with this. And then they tried to go to as many of those places as they possibly could. Some of these places are really, really actually not hard to get to. I believe in the state of Arkansas, the most remote spot is only 1.7 miles away from a road. If you go all the way to like Alaska or even like Wyoming, I think Wyoming is like 21 miles away from a road. Alaska, even further than that. But that's how they define it out there. So here's your other piece of trivia that if you want to take this with you, you can impress friends who will then be like, oh, wow, you're a big nerd. But it is a number you can share. In North Carolina, you can only get 5.5 miles away from a road in the entire state. And I guarantee wherever you are right now, you are much closer than that. But the furthest, you cannot get any further than 5.5 miles away from a road. And so that point is in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Ryan and Rebecca went there with their then 2-year-old daughter. She rode in like one of those like riding backpacks. There's video of them singing Baby Beluga as they walk through the woods, and they get to the spot and they do this YouTube video of what this place is. And I was like, what would it be like to go there? What would I learn by going to this place? And so we ran into a couple of problems that were actually not too hard to solve. The biggest problem was they wouldn't tell us where this place was. So, and I will show you the clues that I had. Basically, the reason why wasn't like we weren't like trustworthy people. They only tell, you know, a certain amount of people. The reason was because they only shared the coordinates of the places where the people who controlled or owned the land gave like explicit okays to share it. This land is actually public land. It's the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and they had not gotten an explicit permission from them. And the thing about going to a national park is you can go. It's public land. You don't have to stay on the trail. It is not illegal to go off the trail, but it is highly discouraged for you to go off the trail for a very good reason. In that, like, it's a big area. You don't have cell phone coverage. If you get lost in there, it may be very, very hard to find you. So they extremely frown on doing that. Also, we know that it's like a dangerous thing to do that. So like what we said was, one, they wouldn't share it with us, but we figured it out. And the reason why is because, as you can see here, distance to a road, 5.5 miles, travel time, 1.5 days. If you keep on going down here, they have a travel log and it says, I went on this trail, I went to that trail, and then we veered off and we went over to here. And this is where we ended up. So knowing that it was 5.5 miles away from a road, and then knowing vaguely, like, you know, generally where this was, I was able to calculate the exact spot. So I figured it out on my own. The next part was to getting there. And getting there was very, very hard. And the reason why it was very, very hard is because I was not about to go just tromping around the woods by myself. I don't want to get lost. So I called up a friend of mine, Andrew Cornelac. He's a photographer who lives in Chapel Hill. He is the guy, if you want pictures of you doing something outdoorsy, adventurous, and that for that thing to end up in a magazine, like, Andrew's your guy. He took pictures when we did an 8-day kayak trip down the Cape Fear River years ago. Is just like, he is the guy who is prepared for it and can do it. And even Andrew and I were both like, we don't want to do this on our own. We need to bring in a ringer. Well, when you start calling around in the Smoky Mountains, there are people that will take you in. You can pay somebody to be like a guide and take you into the park. But everybody that we called to say, can you get us to this exact spot, said no. Because again, they get those permits from the National Park Service. And if they just start they don't want to take people off the trail. They're afraid they're going to lose it. And they're like, no, we don't, I'm sorry, we would like to help, but we can't help. The last guy I called said, hey, I can't help you, but there's a guy I know who's just hanging around Bryson City, and his name is Dwayne. I bet Dwayne would probably take you out there. And I was like, okay. And so I called up Dwayne and I said, Dwayne, we would very much like to go to the most spot in North Carolina. It is off trail in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And he goes, cool, I'll go. I had not told Dwayne where this place was, how long it would take to get there, or when we wanted to leave. But Dwayne was already in. So we met up with him and we got into the woods and we figured it out and went up found our campsite. We're shocked to find two guys already in our campsite. It was this remote backcountry campsite. Really nice guys. We're spending 8 or 9 days just hiking around. So we already encountered people that we didn't expect to find. The next day it was pouring down rain because, again, the Smokies are like the rainiest, wettest part of North Carolina. So if you go to the Smokies and it's not raining on you, you consider yourself lucky. We went around up there. We got to the top of this ridge line. It's this huge elevation. So it's this hard climb in the rain. And we get up to the top there. And at that point I stopped and I turned to Andrew and I said, you know what, we're getting close. Why don't you get out your GPS? He's like, what? I was like, yeah. So I got the coordinates written down here. Why don't you get out your GPS device, you pop them in there, and that way we'll kind of know how far we have to go and what direction it is, you know? And he's like, I'm sorry, get at my what? And I did this thing where, I don't know if this ever happens to y'all, but I had gotten out I just said like, hey, Andrew, so we're going to this place and that sort of thing. So, we'll need GPS to get there. And, I just assumed that like he would bring it and he didn't. And so I'm like, oh no, we are in the middle of the woods. We have hiked a day and a half to get here and we don't have a GPS that'll tell us where the exact spot is. And so I'm like, well, this is not good. I have just maybe wasted everybody's time and resources, and I get to go back to my bosses and tell them I don't actually have a story. And as we're sitting there, I did the thing that instinctively I think we all do now when we feel like there's something that we need to figure out that we can't figure out on our own. You just reach for your phone. And I reached for my phone, and my phone had no service. We hadn't had service since we basically left where we parked at the end of the road to nowhere in Bryson City, where it just ends in a tunnel and there's nothing on the other side. Very famous road. That's where we parked and went in. That's how we got there. Had not had any cell phone service since then. I get it out and I just open up Google Maps and it is blank. There's nothing on it except for a blue dot. And I was like, okay, well, I wonder just randomly, let me see if I can pop in these, like the numbers, the coordinates, pop them in. And all of a sudden, even it's a blank map, a red pin appears on the screen. So just red pin, nothing else. And I zoom out, and then lo and behold, is my blue dot. So my blue dot where I am, there's a red pin right here. And I'm like, I think we can still get there. And it became, again, a thing that you could never do because, 15 years ago, we didn't walk around with phones in our pockets. And if we did, they were just like actual phones, not like smartphones, not iPhones. It became a video game at that point. We got to the same point and we're like, we got to make these two things touch. And when they touch, we will get the prize. We'll get the prize. So I'm very, very happy with myself for having MacGyvered my way into the most remote spot in North Carolina. And when we got there, I'm going to show you a picture of what the most remote spot in North Carolina looks like. It looks like this. Now, that is me on the left. That is Dwayne on the right. Dwayne, by the way, I was following him for a little bit. It is not a good idea to wear green in a place that looks like this. I lost him several times. He was very hard to find. I fell a couple times, and we got there. And we looked there. We looked around, and it was pouring down rain. And we got all the way there. And I think my comparison was, have you ever told all your friends that you should all go to a party? And you're like, this party is going to be awesome. And you get to the party, and the party is not awesome. And then you feel this huge amount of guilt and distress over having like dragged your friends to a place that ends up not being nearly as fun or interesting as you thought it was going to be. That's this place. Okay. Like I will say you can go there. It's not actually, if you have a day and a half and sort of like the skills and the know-how, and you can find a guy like Dwayne, you can get to this place too. When you get there, it's going to look like this. It is green in every direction and there's not much to see. And we were very much like, how long are we going to spend here? We spent 15 minutes. Even that felt too long. And we got back up to the trail and started heading back. And that was it. That was our trip. That was it. And the thing that I learned was it wasn't so much about getting to this place. It was the journey getting there, but it was also meeting Dwayne. And Dwayne, you just assume you see a guy like that. He's carefree. He's eating Pop-Tarts on the trail. You're like, oh yeah, like hiker dude who just hangs around. Like he must be doing this whole life. His answer was no. And when I pressed him on this, he's like, yeah, I didn't really start hiking until a couple of years ago. It really wasn't my thing. And I'm like, well, why is that? And he said, well, I had kind of a regular life and I was married and I went through a pretty nasty divorce. And when I went through this divorce, I really had to really figure out who I was, like what I was about. And when I did that, it drew me to the Appalachian Trail. It drew me to hiking and it drew me to the outdoors. And I hiked the Appalachian Trail. I finished the day I turned 30. And then I realized that I could just exist. I had the kind of job that I could just do from anywhere. He was like one of these original remote workers, right? Like he could use a web designer. He could just do that from wherever he was. And so he traveled across the state, traveled across the country, drove to Alaska and back, and kind of created a new life for himself. And he told me that basically when he got to the point where we had called him, he hadn't been in the outdoors for a while, and we just happened to call him and be like, do you want to go out in the outdoors? And he's like, absolutely. He's like, I forgot how good this felt. And it was just happenstance that we just happened to be the ones that brought him out. And I think a lot more about Dwayne than I do about the actual remote spot itself. My remote spot, it's kind of cool. I can say I've been there, like crossed off the list. But I think more about the people that you find at these kind of places. And I think like today, when you're thinking about remote places, you think about places across North Carolina that you can go to. Going there is the important part, right? Like this is the thing that's a little bit tricky about our modern world is now that you can go, you can see what anything looks like. You can go on Google Earth, whatever, you can see where this, what is in almost any particular spot on Earth immediately. The issue starts to happen is like the things that happen when you don't go there, or you don't talk to people who live there, or you kind of isolate yourself without taking that next step. And it happens quite a bit. And it gives rise to interesting things online. And one of the things that I think about is that things that you don't know about, that you haven't talked to people about, that you don't understand, can feel kind of creepy. They feel kind of weird. There's a term for this called context collapse. And the context collapse is in an online term. Basically, it's like things that are meant for one audience or things that are totally make sense to one group of people do not make sense to another group of people who don't know that first group of people, right? So, there's all kinds of weird technical terminology that sounds scary and weird. But if you're like a doctor or a lawyer or whatever it is that you do, maybe it makes perfectly sense to you and it has a very precise definition. One of the best ways to describe this is, and this is a little bit of, Chris talked about doing something interactive. We're going to do something interactive. I can't see or hear you, but you're going to have to play along. So I'm going to share my screen again. And what I want to show you is something that is on Google Maps. Now, this thing kind of freaked people out a little bit online. The thing that freaked them out was, there's this whole genre of TikToks where people just zoom into things. They start really wide and they just zoom in on their phone map until they find something really crazy. And they're just like, what is this? What is this crazy thing? So this is one of these TikToks that was zoomed in on this particular thing. And I'm going to bring it up right now. So if you're just listening to this, what you're actually going to see is this thing in the middle of the screen here. It's tank, right? It's tank. This is a Google Street View. This is a satellite view. It's tank. People zoomed into this and they're like, wait a minute, if I zoom out a little bit, this is still a tank in the middle of the screen. And then surrounding it is like this moat, and it's in the middle of a round something. And people are like, what is that? Like, what is going on there? And people were like, that's creepy. That's weird. I'm afraid of this. Wait a minute. What is this doing here? I'm a little scared or whatever like that. Some of you who are familiar with North Carolina may already have an idea of what this is. As I zoom out, you will have a better idea. And trust me, I'm not going to leave you hanging for long. I'm going to tell you what this is. So don't worry about it. You zoom out a little bit more, and now you see there's some water over here on the left. There's another one of these circle things up here. You zoom out further, and then now, oh, wait a minute, I'm out on the coast. There's the Neuse River. And there's like Cedar Island over here. There's Highway 70. There's Highway 12 where it ends over on the coast. If you zoom way out a little bit more, you get to the key piece of information, which is right here is a MCAS Cherry Point. This is a Marine bombing range they use for target practice. And they drop practice bombs on these targets out there so they can practice getting good at what they do. People online were like, what is this creepy thing? Like, oh my gosh, I'm freaked out by this. People who live near there are like, oh yeah, that's Cherry Point. Yeah, that's not a big deal at all. It is totally like, if you live in the area and you go talk to people, they're like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. It is manifested in some ways that like, there are like, I think there was a video from somebody on YouTube that was on the ferry from Cedar Island to Ocracoke. They look off and they see like 5 very bright lights hovering in the sky, and they're like, oh no, aliens. And this video got it's like UFOs seen over the sound of North Carolina. People very quickly pointed out, no, that's actually just flares being dropped by the military. But again, if you don't know about the military out there, you would be like, oh no, this is kind of freaky. I think I'm seeing something I've never seen before. I don't know, I'm creeped out. People who live out there, if you talk to them, like, no, there's an explanation for it, and totally makes sense. And I think that's kind of like in my mind, when I think about exploration today and what it means, it is really just getting to the bottom of things that most people don't think about or don't have the time to get to the bottom of. And like I wrote a North Carolina rabbit hole newsletter about that, and it just takes all. I mean, that's all it is. It's just taking your skills and knowing that like out there somebody probably has an explanation for you, and to be able to dig into that and to find those kinds of stories across North Carolina. I mean, I could travel all across the state again, and I'm lucky enough to do it. And I met people there. The talking to part is the interesting part. The views or the vistas or the environment, or like getting to walk to the top of a lighthouse or hiking to the top of a fire tower on top of a mountain and looking out, like those are all inspiring and great. But learning about what makes the state tick, what makes it interesting, why people are moving here, what they're doing, what they're bringing with them, what they're learning when they get here. And learning that like mysteries can be solved. That if you just requires a little bit of thought and a little bit of talking, and you can get there. That's the exciting thing for me. That's kind of what drives me now. I work at Wake Forest now. I have a wonderful job. Shout out to the Program for Leadership and Character. That is where I am currently on my lunch break. Google that if you're interested in that. I will talk to you more offline about that. But like the thing that keeps me going on the journalism side, the reason why I'm doing the North Carolina rabbit hole is because I'm still interested in these things. And as a journalist, as somebody who is curious in this particular way of wondering what the answer is, why things are the way they are, how people got to the places that they got to, why did things develop into what they have, and what happens when change happens. This is the best state in the country to be in. The geography is diverse, the people are diverse, people are moving here, it's growing. There's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of strife, and which you will find anywhere. But in general, when you talk to people across the state, they are interesting, and you will just, as a journalist, as a writer, as somebody who's interested and curious, it is a playground, and you just almost never run out of stuff. So that being said, there's a lot of stuff that I could get to that I could talk for like a couple hours and nobody wants to hear that. But I encourage you to check out the North Carolina rabbit hole, to check out the website if you're interested in that. If you have an idea that you want me to solve, I can get into that. And I would love to take a couple questions now. I think Chris maybe has a couple from the chat. So thank you all very much for having me.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you, Jeremy.
No problem.
Incredible. Love these stories. And already some folks are starting to drop questions and maybe mysteries that you may or may not have solved yet into the chat. So with the time I've got left, I'm just going to jump right in with our viewer questions. The first one I see here, any North Carolina places you haven't been recently that you want to visit?
I calculated recently that I have been to. North Carolina has 100 counties. I have been to all but 6 of them. So Hope County, I have not been there. I am really sorry. I will find a way to get down there. There are some little places in the mountains that I just haven't been to or haven't spent a lot of time with. One of the a lot of these places I go to, like, I mean, I'm working in a place now, I'm working at a university that people have thought a lot about. Like, they've done tons of research, they've written dissertations that had to defend them, and they're extremely knowledgeable about, about through everything they've written and researched and done and been able to teach. The only things that I know are things that I've actually reported on. So, the things that I know are like, oh, I went there and did a story on it. Now I feel like I'm sort of knowledgeable about it. And one of the places that I wish I had kind of stumbled upon and I wish I had gone to more often was the Cherryhala Skyway out in far western North Carolina. Starts in Robbinsville, runs into Tennessee. Again, if it's Long Carolina, it just keeps on going into Long Carolina. But it's this amazing thing, and the Blue Ridge Parkway very deservedly gets a lot of accolades, and is a thing that people love to do. It's a widely visited. The Cherryhala Skyway is gorgeous, and it is much more quiet and remote, but gives you the same kind of things. And I really wish that I could go back out there and do that again. And again, if I do make my 5th trip to Murphy, I think I can knock it off. But those are those kind of places that I wish I had gone to a little more often, is up in the mountains and a few places out near the coast too as well. And Hope County, I got to get there.
Got to get to Hope County.
Got to get to Hope County.
Linda wants to know if you've spent time exploring Cataloochee, and writes that the road there was pretty challenging during a storm.
I have not. I have not done too much out there. I have been to. This is not. This is another long place in North Carolina that begins with the letter C. But I went to Chocowinity one time, in Chocowinity out on the east, down east. I went out there, and I was going to do a story about Chocowinity, and Chocowinity is got a really interesting name, but I didn't find a whole lot there. And so I was already out in Eastern North Carolina. I'm like, what am I going to do? And so I kind of, this is again where I think an old school map helps. I just got the map out and I'm like, well, whatever, let me see if I can find something out here that's significant on a map. About 30 miles from Chocowinity is a little town called Aurora. And Aurora is home to a fossil museum. And it feels like it is at the end of the earth. And if you go to Aurora, it is a tiny, tiny, tiny town next to a big, I believe, phosphate mine. And what they would do is they'd scrape all the phosphate out and they would dig up, I don't know how many fossils out of the ground out there. So shark teeth, yes. Megalodon teeth, yes. Fossils, yes. And they were like, you know what we ought to do? We just have all these fossils. Let's just open up a little museum out here. Why not? Like, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So they opened this tiny little museum that gets maybe like 20,000 visitors a year, which is even pretty remarkable. And I walked in the door out there and they were like, you come. They were like, oh, we asked you, we sent a note to our state like years ago and like you weren't able to come out here and finally you came. And I was like, yeah. And it was just, and again, another amazing remote place. And you go across the street and they just dump tailings from the mine and you can go and do your own fossil hunting across the way. So I have not been too much to Cataloochee. I have been to Chocowinity once. And when I went to Chocowinity, it led me to that amazing little place in Aurora, which is out there. So worth the visit, but it's a drive.
I've heard of Aurora and the Aurora Fossil Museum. We have specimens from Aurora in our museum collection too, that I tell stories about. But I got to get out there now. I got to go see this place.
They will take care if you go. They'll take care of you.
I'll tell them I know Jeremy. All right. Renee wants to know if there's a coffee table book in your future.
Oh, that'd be great. I am constrained only by free time, which I don't have a lot of. The nice thing about writing the North Carolina Rabbit Hole is I am sort of at my own discretion in that, like, some days I just write these things very, very quickly based on what comes up. I live outside of Greensboro with my wife and our two kids, who are 8 and 6. And I'm lucky enough to kind of get to see the world through their eyes. And so a coffee table book is something that I would love to do. And maybe I will, and maybe now that you've encouraged me, I can just get off my rear end and maybe make that happen. So if what you need to do is just email me directly and just keep on yelling at me until I do it. And then I will do it. So just be mean and I will say, fine, I'll make your book and I'll do the book.
I don't know if Renee can be mean to you, but Renee's on it. All right. Do you ever get scared traveling in some of these remote places? And if so, how do you get over it?
So it depends. I mean, I think the nice thing is that in most places, I mean, you have a phone. You kind of know where you're going and you can kind of write down, even I know I'm going to lose coverage, I can kind of write down where I'm going. So the same trip that I ended up on the Cherry-Halo Skyway, I got a little bit lost. I had been doing a story about that ended up as a podcast, an episode of Away Message about a murder case from 1892 in which somebody standing on one side of the North Carolina state line fired a bullet across the other state line, hit somebody, and they died, and they had to figure out where the crime occurred, and it was not a straightforward thing. In fact, it took a lot of twists and turns. And so to find the actual place where this happened took a lot of twists and turns. And I ended up way out on some what I thought were Forest Service roads, and I got turned around, and I wasn't quite sure. I had a lot of gas because the people in Murphy were like, fill up your tank. But I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to get out. And that was a little worrisome. And I've basically, I got to a point where I was actually underneath the Skyway, the chariot. I looked up above me and there was a bridge, and I finally said, I got to be really close to this major road. And I found it, and I got back, and I was like, thank goodness. But in certain cases, I tried to bring people with me. I tried not to do things alone. This qualifies as remote. This qualifies as maybe a scary place. But when I did an episode of Away Message where I went up in the tallest structure in North Carolina, which is the television tower in Gaston County. It's the WBTV TV tower. Somehow I was able to get up there because the guy who changes the lights on the tower made me his unpaid employee for the day. So I got up in the elevator, and I'm not afraid of heights in general, but I was more than 1,800 feet above the ground in a TV tower on a nice day, but you were still 1,800 feet above the ground. And I did not find myself too scared. And the reason why is because he had me strapped in with I don't know how many things. So if I was going to fall, I was not going to fall very far. So thank goodness for that. The other thing is that he was a very calming, nice presence. The guy, like the person you think like you have to be crazy to have this job, is the most chill, laid back person I have ever met in my life. And he was like, hey, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. I'm here. I got you. And so having somebody else and not doing it alone, if you can help it, is the way that you get over that fear, that you're in this with somebody and you're in it together.
Yeah, I love that. Excellent stuff. All right, let's see here. Do you have one favorite interview or story, or one that especially stands out? I can't imagine you do, but perhaps.
I mean, there's a couple. I have two from a while back, and one that is the more recent one. One is just that I was telling you about this murder case, and I won't go too deep into it, except for to find the fact that I found a descendant of the person who pulled the trigger in this case, and I was able to track it down through a combination of original court records that I found in the archives and in the state archives. Which, by the way, like when you request it, like they give you a box that has like the original papers, like written in cursive on like from 1894, like incredible. Was able to piece that together with like ancestry records and census records and track down the grandson of the person who pulled the trigger, who had no idea who this person was, did not know, and ended up finding out that all this was contained inside this family tree, this family history, this very comprehensive family history that he had never read. And so it's weird being like, hey, this guy's your grandpa. You don't know me, I'm just calling out of the blue, but like this person was your grandfather, and here's what he did, and here's this full story. And that was kind of incredible to be able to share that with somebody who I'd never met, but able to kind of fill in a piece of their history that our paths crossed. A more recent example might be, again, when I tell you that people ask me to try to figure out anything, anything really applies. Somebody said, and I think I have a picture of this. They sent me this tweet, and this tweet basically was, why is Steven Spielberg wearing a North Carolina Highway Patrol hat on the set of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in 1989? And if you can't see it there, it might be too small, but that's Steven Spielberg on the left. On the right is Harrison Ford. In between them is Harrison Ford's stunt double, which looks just like Harrison Ford. But that's Spielberg on the left, and he's wearing this yellow Highway Patrol hat. And somebody says, hey, have you seen this? How did he get the hat? Well, first thing is, let's contact Steven Spielberg, but that didn't work. So then I ended up contacting a group of people who are very much they love Indiana Jones movies to the point where they try to collect and catalog every single picture from behind the scenes of all of the Indiana Jones movies. And I sent this. I found a Facebook group. I joined the group. I sent this picture to them. They immediately found more and more pictures of this hat, and I've got a couple of them. This is the actual thing that I wrote. It wasn't just one picture, right? Here's another picture of him wearing this hat. There are just more and more and more. He's wearing this yellow hat very prominently, and but they didn't know where it came from. And I looked up and I sent this to the Highway Patrol, and they said, something that's weird about this is like, we have Highway Patrol hats like this. We have never seen a yellow one. We don't know, like if you want a black one, a blue one, maybe like a red one, we can get you those. We have those laying in the back. We have never seen a yellow hat that looks like this. We don't understand where it came from, but let me ask around. And so they made connections and they asked around about it. And they took me to basically a gentleman who was from Anson County. He was a retired trooper, and his name was Marcus Hammonds, former patrol sergeant. He was when Steven Spielberg came to shoot The Color Purple in 1985 in Anson County around Wadesboro. The State Highway Patrol helped do traffic control and security and that sort of thing, and they would all eat together. And Spielberg would come over and say hi to everybody. And as a nice gesture, he's like, you know what he would probably like? He would probably love to have a Highway Patrol hat. So let me go see if I can find one. Oh, I don't have one. So he ripped off a patch off an old uniform. He took it to his mother, I believe. He said, hey, can you sew this patch onto this yellow hat that I have laying around? And she did it. And then he gave him the hat. He's like, oh, cool, neat. And 4 years later, in the middle of the desert in Spain, Steven Spielberg is wearing that hat. So, yeah, kind of a thing that, who really cares in the end why he's wearing the hat? Or, he wore a hat for one day that just happened to be on the set of a very famous movie. But along the way, you get to delve into all these different things, all these different places, and meet people. And you met, it ends up being a very personal story. And that one, I think, really, it sticks with me just because, dug it out of the closet and wore it, and it meant something to him. And it really meant something to this guy who I don't think had really told the story before. So, of all the recent ones I've done, that one's really, really stuck with me. And it was not only satisfying to put together, but it was just, it was satisfying to write. It was satisfying to learn and go on that journey along with this. So that was an important one to me.
Well, that just seems to bring it all back around and bring it all together right here at the end of the program. Jeremy, thanks for being with us today. Really appreciate your time and your stories and your expertise at storytelling. And thanks for always going to these places and chatting people up.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as y'all keep reading it, I'll keep doing it.
There are people in the chat dropping their appreciations for your presentation. Also, folks who say they already get the email, the North Carolina Rabbit Hole emails. And we dropped links to the North Carolina Rabbit Hole and a way message in the chat. So folks can dive right in, maybe get to know North Carolina just a little bit better.
Yeah.
So again, thanks for being with us. And everybody, we'll be back here again next Wednesday. You can see the lineup for the June Lunchtime Discovery Series at North Carolina EE on Twitter, or you can head to eenorthcarolina.org, which is the website and the social media handles for the Office of Environmental Education. There you can see the lineups. You can even sign up for the email newsletter to get the YouTube link right in your inbox every single week. You can also check out naturalsciences.org, the museum's website, where you can see events and programs that are coming up like this one and many others. And Jeremy will finish. They've got the websites in the chat, but if they wanted to follow you online and keep up, how can they do that?
Yeah, I would just say the easiest thing is to go to ncrabbithole.com. That is the place where I am trying to hang out most often these days. Yeah, sign up for the emails. They are free if you want them to be. And yeah, start there, and hopefully I'll see you there.
Excellent stuff. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye.